Good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome back. Today we're going to look at more folklore around Ireland and different monsters and, well, not just monsters, but all the different creatures. And today we're looking at the Cailleach. And in this, we're going to go over, might be a longer one because we're going to be going over what she is, the etymology of the word Cailleach, and what she represents for the Irish. So please sit back, relax, enjoy a horn of mead, smash that subscribe button for me, and enjoy today learning about the Cailleach. The Cailleach, or Veiled One, was a Celtic goddess who ruled over the winds of winter. Appearing as an old veiled woman, she was both creator and destroyer, and served as patron of animals, particularly wolves. You'll notice in a lot of Irish especially, you do have the goddesses being both creator and destroyer. The Vorgu is another example of this, where she's the goddess of fertility as well as the goddess of war, as well as many others, but that's not the topic of today. Today we're looking at the Cailleach. Being as though she was both a creator and a destroyer, it's often thought, when you look at her, you can't call her strictly good or strictly evil. Like most Celtic stuff, there's a balance. It's said in the Irish lore that Bridget and Cailleach shared their rule throughout the year, with Bridget reigning during the summer and then, of course, the Cailleach holding sway throughout the winter. The Cailleach was married numerous times, but the best known of her husbands was a trickster deity, Burach, with whom she had many children. One of the great Celtic ancestors, the Cailleach, was the goddess of the cold and the winds, sometimes known as the Veiled One, or Queen of Winter. And the Cailleach determined the duration of the winter's length and harshness. As both divine hag and creator deity, she remains popular with poets and writers. The Cailleach dwelled in Scotland, Ireland, and the Isle of Man, and many places remain dedicated to her within those regions to this very day. The etymology of the word Cailleach, and is both common word in both Scottish and Irish Gaelic, and meaning old woman or hag. This current word was derived from Cailleach, a term meaning veiled one in Old Gaelic. These terms stem from a base root sharing with many others to describe women such as Cailleach. Poets, have given her different names across time. Digdi or Digi, Milchra, Birgdog, the fairy woman who served Lugh of the Long Arm as an infant, Brudi, one of Lugh's wives, and Burach. Due to many of these being separate characters altogether, some scholars believe that the Cailleach was more of a title than a name. Pretty much any old woman could be called Cailleach. Her most prominent title was Cailleach Burra, revealing her as the master of winter. The many regions named for her often give her unique titles, reflective of their representative landscapes. An example includes an Cailleach Burra, the Hag of Burra, in County Cork, Ireland, and the Storm's Hag in Scotland. Some of the attributes that are usually associated with her are that she primarily appears as a veiled woman, sometimes with only one eye. Her skin is deathly pale or blue, while her teeth were red, and her colors adorned her with skulls. She could leap across mountains and ride storms. In the Manx tradition, the Cailleach was a shapeshifter, capable of transforming into a giant bird. The Veiled One was a creator deity that shaped much of the known landscape. Whether she did so intentionally still remains unclear. Her tools of creation and destruction, including her hammer, with which she was able to control storms and thunder. In some legends, she also controlled a well that would occasionally overflow and flood the land. The Cailleach was neither fully good nor fully evil. Her intention varied from tale to tale. Although her association with storms and thunder, she was natural and wild, destructive force. Despite this, she also cared deeply for animals, both wild and domestic. During the dark of winter months, in all three Gaelic-speaking regions, she was the patron of wolves, unbounded by winter hunger in Scotland. She also served as a deer herder. The Cailleach was both ageless and immortal. As winter gave way to the spring, she would take a drought that returned her to youth. In Manach's legend, she spent half the year as a young woman and the other half as an old crone. She was only known as a Cailleach during the later half in Ireland. She had 7 periods of youth, after which she remained old permanently. The seasonal division between summer and winter, where the Cailleach ruled the winter and Brigid ruled the summer, highlighted the association with the two goddesses. On Simonius, or the time of the year around October 31st, the Irish Celtic year ends and winter begins, marking the return of Cailleach. In Scotland and Isle of Man, the Cailleach transforms into Brigid during Beltane, a fertility festival held May 1st. The Cailleach was also a goddess of grain, a key resource in surviving winter. The last sheaf of grain harvested was dedicated to her and used to bring, the next planting season. Like many Irish goddesses, the Cailleach was linked to sovereignty and rulership. Before anyone could rule the land, they first had to garner her approval. This is, again, like the Vorgu. The sites. This is some of the sites that the Cailleach is, I'd say, associated with. One of them, and most remarkable attributes, is with her association with places. The Cailleach was tied to inhospitable locations across the Gaelic-speaking Celtic world. The Cailleach has more ties to local geography than any other Celtic deity. Many locations had retained their Cailleach connections to this day. Such locations are Haig's Head at the Cliffs of Moher in County Clare, Ireland, the Haig's Chairs atop Seven Cailleach in County Meath, Ireland, Ben Callan, the largest mountain of Argyll Brut in Scotland, the whirlpool of the Gulf of Corryvreckan of Argyll Brut in Scotland, Tugnacharach ritual site near Glencarach in Glenloyne in Peachshire, Scotland, Ben Nachalach in the Isle of Skye in Scotland. Well, now we go into the family. The Cailleach had few explicit familial ties, the most well-known of which was the Builgish, the Scottish trickster spirit, whom she had many children. According to an old Irish poem, she was a maiden 7 times, allowing her to have many children by, many husbands, as well as countless foster children. By the time her final period of youth had ended, she had outlived her husbands and children alike, and was said to be the maternal ancestor of every Irish man in and tribe. Some of the myths regarding her. While many of the Cailleach's myths have been faded from memory, a number of rituals and traditions still exist. On Brigid, or February 1st each year, the Cailleach runs out of firewood for the winter. In the Manx tradition, she transforms into a giant bird and collects firewood in her beak. In Ireland and Scotland, meanwhile, she collects firewood as an old woman. If she wishes for winter to last longer, she makes the day sunny and bright for her search. If she accidentally oversleeps, the day is stormy and grey. Thus, the tradition holds that if February 1st is grey and wintry, winter will be shorter that year. If the day is bright, well, winter will return due to her preparation. In the US, this tradition was transformed into Groundhog's Day, removing the Cailleach while retaining the central ritual. This is where in US and Canada they get their whole, like it was stated, Groundhog's Day came from. Tigna Cailleach, the Cailleach, the Brosha and her children appeared to the people of Glenlone and Glen Cailleach seeking shelter. Despite their fearsome reputations, and perhaps because of them, the family was granted shelter. During this period, the surrounding glens became incredibly fertile. Before departing the area, the Cailleach gave the people a parting gift. The area would be internally fertile, providing that they put up stones for her and her family between Beltane and Simonias. Each year, this ritual is repeated. In literature, we have this saying, "The maidens rejoice when May Day comes to them. For me, sorrow is meeter. I am wretched. I am an old hag." And this is the lament of the hag Abira in the translation by Lady Gregory. The Cailleach has appeared in literature throughout the ages. In the 8th century poem, Lament of the Old Woman, she reflects on her faded youth and laments its loss. In Donald Alexander Mackenzie's 20th century retelling of Scottish folklore, the Cailleach becomes Bira, Queen of Winter. The work retained much of Cailleach's classic characterizations, and along with Lady Gregory's translation of Old Irish tales, served as one of the most prominent sources of the Cailleach myths. In other mythology, the Cailleach was unique among the Celtic deities, only appearing in Gaelic-speaking regions, namely Ireland, Scotland, and Man, where we get the Manx Gaelic. While Brittonic Celtic regions told stories involving similar hags, none of these characters could rival the consistency of the Cailleach. Such hags include Bacanis, the blue-faced hag of Leinster with iron claws who scooped on children. These hags were often closer to the popular notion of a hag rather than the more capacious Cailleach. Outside the Celtic world, the Cailleach has numerous similarities based on individual attributes. As a creator deity, she bore similarities to the Greco-Roman Gaia. The Cailleach was also remarkably similar to the Norse deity Skaldi, the goddess of winter and darkness, as well as the Germanic Hoful, wife of Wotan or Odin, and master of the winter's colds, though her stormy hammer closely resembles Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. The Cailleach's behavior and appearance were closely to that of Thor's foes, the frost giants. In Slavic mythology, Baba Yaga carried many of the attributes of the Cailleach. It's impossibly old woman's just likely to help hinder. Baba Yaga made many appearances in Slavic folklore. Her leaping chicken legs hut moved in with the same way the Cailleach did when she traveled between the mountains. Now, in pop culture, let's look at that, because some of you may be interested in the pop culture aspect of her. Then we'll get to even more information about her. The Cailleach has appeared in multiple pieces of pop culture, including in Dungeons & Dragons. A bear hag took the Cailleach's name and appearance as a blue-skinned, winter-based hag. In fantasy television series Merlin, the Cailleach appeared when Morgana broke the veil between the living and the dead. She deemed a sacrifice in exchange for returning Dosha to the land of the dead. And although Arthur and Merlin offered themselves, Lancelot gave himself instead. The band Crow of Astara featured a song called Cailleach, Crone Moon, on their album Crone. A short film written and directed by Rosie Hillman told the story of Morag, an old woman who's alive at the edge of civilization in the Scottish Western Isles. The character, whom wore a hood like veil, bore more than a few similarities to Cailleach. The Cailleach has appeared in a number of video games. She made an in-name-only appearance in Final Fantasy XI, appeared as a demon Megameni Tinsini series, most notably Shin Megami Tensei III. An analysis of the archetypical wise woman healer that appeared in Ireland's oral traditions can be found in Gerard O'Corrich's book of the Cailleach, Stories of the Wise Woman Healer. Cailleach, or veiled woman, is one of Ireland's most ancient deities, her realm being the ice and cold of winter. Whenever the green thing slept for untold eons beneath her thick icy cloak, it was said that she ruled the world, until she gave cause for great sorrow and wept floods of tears across the land, her heart melting to thaw and letting loose the rivers as she sobbed. She threw large rocks from her apron, forming mountains and hills, and her hammer molded the valleys below. Some even claim that she gave birth to all spirits and she of the old world. She is known by many names, including Cailleach Burgh, as we know from her household in Cork, or rather Kerry, Durg and Muircheburan, which means sorrow and queen of little sun. It is said that she gave Fionn McConnell his greyish hair, and when Phaethon the Wise of 100 Lives arrived in Ireland before the flood, he thought that it was first that he should discover the Cailleach, who was older than himself. Are you the grandmother who ate an apple in the beginning? He asked her, but she didn't respond. She gets older in the autumn and younger in the winter, until she lets go of the summer flowers, bloom into spring. At harvest time, the first farmer to start taking in his crops would make a very little poppet of the crop's last sheaf and throw it into the neighbor's field, who would then rush to take their crops and throw the doll into the following field. And the previous farmer to harvest his crops would have to provide for the house of this same old lady. And the battles were fierce to keep the catering for the wintry visitor. The young woman feared the last sheaf, believing that if they tied it, they would never marry and live alone as a Cailleach. Thankfully, trying to feed the previous bundle to the sheeps would save this spinster's life. Countless lone forces to stand stones are said to be holy to her, as when she brought the winter, she cast her staff underneath the holly tree, and gross bush transformed into stone until the spring. She claims ownership of the animals that live in the untamed Arctic environments, including red deer, wolves, the leaping salmon, the springing goats, and the guards that watch over them. She also referred to as the hag of the storm, since, it was the one who selected would survive and, who would also die during the winter storms. A Cailleach who lived in Cyburga, just in the South Ireland, received a visit from a traveling monk who had heard about a woman who was so old that even she lost track of the years. He won't realize how much of her own house because modest enough, but she welcomed him and his scribe. If it's okay, could I ask you how old you are? Some people claim you're ancient, and more ancient than the road I traversed to get here, the fields surrounding it, and the mountains in which they are located. She replied, "No harm to me at all. Given I have little to talk about, or even less knowledge, I do, however, kill an ox each year, make a soup from its bones, and then fling the leg bone into the loft over your head. Your tiny boy can tally if you send him up." Since there was nowhere to count the bones in the darkness, the farrier's son climbed a loft ladder and started throwing bones down. The farrier wrote a mark inside a thick book he carried with him for each bone. Finally, the bone book was filled with markings, and the farrier was tired of tallying, so he yelled up to the boy and inquired as to whether he was about finished. The boy popped his head out and claimed he hadn't even cleared one corner. The monk cast an unflattering glance at the old woman and told the boy to leave because he was deep to his knees in broken bones. He talked to the lady and found out about some of the marvels she could remember. They were genuinely bizarre stories that hardly made any sense. Despite this, he didn't record them because his notebook was all ready full. So remember, bring in that firewood and bring in those crops so the Cailleach will grant you good spring.